Karen discovered the video at 6:47 am while doing her morning sweep of neighborhood social media. HOA Karen Gobli's Fuel PSYCHO over CR Wash had 12,000 views, 847 comments, and was climbing fast. Her carefully documented presentation had been edited into a 3-minute highlight reel that made her look like a suburban dictator obsessed with measuring teenagers' parking jobs. Her phone started buzzing immediately. First her sister in Phoenix. "Karen, are you okay? Someone sent me this video." Then her neighbor across the street. "We need to talk." By 8 a.m., she received 17 calls, 43 text messages, and one voice message from a local news reporter asking for comment. Karen sat in her kitchen, watching the view count climb, feeling something inside her chest tighten with each refresh. The comments were brutal. "Lady needs a hobby that doesn't involve terrorizing kids. This is why nobody likes HOA Karens. Someone should throw her clipboard in the pool." That last comment sparked something dark in Karen's mind. The pool. The community pool that she'd fought for 3 years to keep pristine, rule-compliant, and properly regulated. The pool where residents continuously violated capacity limits, brought unauthorized flotation devices, and let their children run on the wet deck, despite her clearly posted safety signage. By 2 p.m., Karen had reached a decision point that would later be described by residents as the moment she completely snapped. She loaded her car with everything she'd need: her laminated rulebook, her digital camera, her official HOA citation book, and, in a burst of inspiration that felt like divine guidance, her son's old chain and padlock from when he briefly owned a bicycle. The afternoon pool session was in full swing when Karen arrived. The Hendersons were there with their newly groomed golden retriever, unleashed in violation of Section 8.3. Mrs. Chen's teenage daughter was using an oversized unicorn float, unapproved flotation device. And there, right in the center of it all, was Marcus Thompson's Honda Civic, parked in the fire lane while he helped his girlfriend out of the pool. "That's it?" Karen's voice carried across the entire pool area, causing conversations to stop and heads to turn. "This ends today." She marched toward Marcus's car with the determination of a woman who had finally found her hill to die on. The Honda was unlocked. These teenagers had no sense of security protocols either, and Karen yanked open the driver's door. "Mrs. Pemberton, what are you doing?" Marcus called out, climbing out of the pool. Karen was busy connecting the chain through the steering wheel and around the gear shift, her fingers working with the focused intensity of someone who'd finally found the perfect solution. "What I should have done from the beginning," she announced. "Immediate vehicle impoundment for ongoing violations of community standards." She snapped the padlock shut and stepped back, clipboard raised. "This vehicle will remain secured until all violations are remediated, all fines are paid, and a formal compliance agreement is signed by the property owners." The pool area had gone completely silent except for the gentle lapping of water and someone's phone camera recording everything. "You can't do that," Jennifer Thompson said, arriving just in time to witness Karen's triumph. "That's our son's car. This is community property," Karen replied, gesturing broadly. "And this vehicle is illegally parked in a fire lane, creating a safety hazard for all residents." What happened next would be debated in HOA legend for years to come. Some witnesses swear Karen meant to do it. Others insist it was an accident. But as Karen stepped backward to admire her handiwork, her sensible beige flat caught the edge of the pool deck. Physics took over from there. Karen windmilled her arms, clipboard flying through the air, as she tumbled backward into the deep end of the Willowbrook Estates community pool. Her splash was spectacular, a fountain of chlorinated water that soaked 3 pool chairs and one very surprised golden retriever. Karen's Rampage. The Pool Incident. Part 1. The fuse is lit. Karen Pemberton stood at her kitchen window, binoculars pressed against her designer glasses, watching 17-year-old Marcus Thompson wash his beat-up Honda Civic in his family's driveway. The sudsy water was trickling toward the storm drain, and Karen's left eye began its familiar twitch. "Section 4.27, she muttered, flipping through her laminated copy of the Willowbrook Estates HOA handbook. No vehicle washing in driveways between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. without proper water containment measures. Karen had been the HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she'd issued 247 violation notices, organized 12 emergency board meetings, and maintained a 97% compliance rate. Her filing cabinet contained color-coded folders for every resident, cross-referenced by violation type and severity. She was, in her own words, keeping property values pristine. But today felt different. Today, Karen had discovered that the Hendersons at 1247 Oak Lane had been running an unlicensed dog grooming business from their garage. Mrs. Chen had been parking her work van, a commercial vehicle, in her driveway overnight. And now this teenager was flagrantly violating water usage protocols. That's it, Karen declared, grabbing her clipboard and storming outside. Her sensible beige flats slapped against the sidewalk as she marched toward the Thompson house, her platinum bob bouncing with each determined step. "Excuse me, young man," she called out, clipboard raised like a weapon. "I need to speak with your parents immediately." Marcus looked up from scrubbing his passenger door, water dripping from the sponge in his hand. "They're at work, Mrs. Pemberton. Is everything okay?" "Everything is most certainly not okay. You're in direct violation of municipal water usage guidelines and HOA Regulation 4.27. This soapy water is creating environmental hazards and it's just soap, ma'am. My mom uses it to wash dishes every day." Karen's eye twitch intensified. The audacity, the complete disregard for community standards. She clicked her pen with the fury of a woman who had reached her breaking point. "I'm writing you a citation," she announced, scribbling furiously. "Your parents will receive formal notice within 24 hours. If this behavior continues, we'll have no choice but to escalate to the city council." Marcus blinked, soap suds sliding down his car. "For washing my car. For flagrant disregard of community standards that protect all of our property values," Karen snapped, ripping off the citation and thrusting it toward him. "These rules exist for a reason, young man. Without order, we have chaos." As she stalked back toward her house, Karen felt a familiar rush of satisfaction. Another violation documented. Another resident educated about proper community living. But as she reached her front door, she heard something that made her freeze mid-step. Marcus was laughing. Actually laughing. And worse, his friends who had gathered to help him wash the car were laughing too. "Did she seriously just cite you for car washing?" One of them snorted. "My mom's gonna flip when she sees this." Marcus chuckled, waving the citation. "Wait till I tell everyone at school that the HOA lady wrote me a ticket for using soap and water." Karen's hands trembled as she gripped her clipboard. They were mocking her. Mocking the very foundation of community order that she worked so hard to maintain. The careful structure she'd built, rule by rule, citation by citation, was being reduced to a joke by a group of teenagers. That night, Karen sat in her home office, surrounded by violation notices and community guidelines, plotting her next move. The teenagers thought this was funny. Tomorrow, she'd show them exactly how serious community standards could be, starting with an emergency board meeting to address the escalating pattern of community disrespect. But first, she had some research to do about the Thompson family's compliance history, and the more she dug, the more violations she found. 3 days later, Karen stood at the podium in the Willowbrook Estates Community Center, facing a crowd of 37 residents who looked anywhere from mildly annoyed to openly hostile. She'd called the emergency meeting for 7 p.m. sharp, and her PowerPoint presentation was loaded with evidence. "Thank you all for attending on such short notice," Karen began, adjusting her blazer. "We're here to address a serious breakdown in community standards that threatens the very foundation of our neighborhood's integrity." She clicked to her first slide, a photo of Marcus washing his car, taken through her telephoto lens. Exhibit A, unauthorized vehicle washing with improper water containment, photographed at 2:17 p.m. last Tuesday. Tom Thompson, Marcus's father, shifted uncomfortably in his folding chair. "Karen, It's just a kid washing his car. This feels a bit. I'm not finished, Karen interrupted, clicking to the next slide. Exhibit B. The same vehicle parked 4.3 inches beyond the approved driveway setback line, documented over the past 6 months. The crowd murmured. Dave Henderson leaned over to his wife. She measured the kids' parking. Karen's voice rose above the whispers. And Exhibit C. Security camera footage showing this vehicle's music exceeding our 45 decibel limit on 3 separate occasions while parked in the driveway. You've been recording my son? Jennifer Thompson stood up, her voice tight with anger. I've been documenting violations, Karen corrected, as is my duty as your elected HOA president. Which brings me to my recommendation: immediate vehicle removal from community premises until all violations are remediated and a formal compliance plan is submitted. The room erupted. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. This is insane. You can't ban a kid's car. Karen, you've gone too far this time. But Karen felt energized by the chaos. This was exactly the kind of passionate response that showed people finally understood the stakes. She banged her gavel, a purchase she'd made specifically for occasions like this. Order, I call for order. When the room finally quieted, she continued with her trump card. I've consulted with our legal counsel, and we have grounds for immediate action under emergency provisions outlined in Section 12.4 of our covenants. She hadn't actually consulted with legal counsel, but she'd spent hours reading HOA law websites and felt confident in her interpretation. Tom Thompson stood up slowly. Karen, I've lived here for 8 years. My son has never caused any real problems. This is harassment. What this is, Karen replied, her voice steady and cold, is accountability. Every resident signed these covenants. Every resident agreed to these standards. And every resident will follow them or face the consequences. The meeting ended with the board reluctantly agreeing to review Karen's evidence, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. Board members Sarah Mills and Greg Patterson exchanged glances that clearly said they thought she'd lost her mind. Walking to her car after the meeting, Karen felt a familiar mixture of vindication and isolation. Behind her, she could hear residents clustering together, their voices carrying across the parking lot. Someone needs to do something about her. This has gotten completely out of hand. My nephew's a lawyer. Maybe we should look into our options. Karen's hands shook slightly as she started her car. For the first time in 3 years, she wondered if she'd pushed too hard. But then she remembered Marcus and his friends laughing, remembered the casual disrespect for everything she'd worked to build. No, she was right. She was protecting their community, their property values, their way of life. If they couldn't see that now, they would eventually. As she pulled into her own perfectly compliant driveway, Karen was already planning her next move. If the board wouldn't act, she'd find another way to enforce community standards. The Willowbrook Estates covenants were on her side, and she intended to use every tool at her disposal. What she didn't notice was Marcus's car parked around the corner, or the group of teenagers sitting inside it, filming everything through the community center's windows. The internet, after all, loved a good HOA horror story. When she surfaced, gasping and sputtering, her platinum bob plastered to her head, and her blazer floating around her like a life preserver, the silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds. Then Marcus Thompson started laughing. Not mean laughter, but the kind of pure, delighted laughter that's impossible to contain. It spread like wildfire around the pool deck until every resident, including some who'd been ready to call the police, was laughing at the sight of their HOA president trailing water next to her laminated rulebook, which was slowly disintegrating in the chlorinated water. Karen floated there, looking up at the circle of faces, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not defeat exactly, but a strange kind of clarity. She'd spent 3 years building walls of rules and regulations, creating distance between herself and her neighbors in the name of community standards. Now she was literally in over her head, and somehow, for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Someone want to throw me a pool noodle? She called out, and the laughter doubled. As Tom Thompson helped her out of the pool and someone else cut the chain off Marcus's car. Karen realized her phone was buzzing in her waterlogged blazer pocket. Probably another reporter. The video of her pool plunge would likely get even more views than her HOA presentation. But as she stood dripping on the deck, watching Marcus and his girlfriend share a towel while Mrs. Chen's daughter deflated her unicorn float without being asked, Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like part of the community. The question now was, what exactly was she going to do about it?